You're
So
good
my
to go.
name's Darren, and we're going to get started. Okay, so if you want to put the view on my hands, probably be. All right, so the yarn that I'm using for the class is Hometown Bonus Bundle, and this is a yarn by Lion Brand, and it's available on michaels.com. And this color is Houston, so it's a nice light color, so it's good for learning and practicing and for demonstrating. So this is the yarn I'm using. Most beginners probably use straight needles like this, but because of the way my tripod is set up, they're kind of in the way. So I'm going to be demonstrating today using these circular needles. And the circular needles are really nice because they don't kind of get in the way. So if you want to knit in a car or something, then the circular needles are a great choice. So I've got some stitches cast. I cast on a few stitches. I'm going to cast on just one more, just to kind of review the cast on quickly. So you start out just like a knit stitch, bring it through, and then instead of transferring it over to the right hand needle, you put it on the left hand needle like that. And so that's the knitted on cast on, just for a quick review for you. And I'm going to show you a couple of knit stitches just for a review. You enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring the stitch through and transfer it over. Enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring the stitch through, transfer it over. So just so we can contrast the difference between that and the purl stitch. So now let me just do a few more of the knit stitch here, and then I'll demonstrate the purl. Okay. So for the purl stitch, it's very similar to the knit stitch. So once you learn the motions, it's pretty easy to learn the purl. So what you're going to do is you're going to open up your needles, and then you're going to take your working yarn and you bring the yarn in between your needles so that the yarn is on the front, so it's facing you. So that's the first major difference between the knit and the purl. The next major difference is when you're knitting, you enter the stitch this direction. But for the purl stitch, you're kind of diving into the stitch. So you're entering the stitch in this direction. So for the purl stitch, you dive in to the stitch, make your X, you wrap your yarn counterclockwise. This motion is more like you're pushing the yarn back through that loop, and then you transfer it over. So I'll show you another way to do it, where I wrap the yarn with my right hand. So you enter the stitch, you dive into the stitch, make the X, and then you put everything in your left hand. And now my right hand is available to do other things. So I can use my right hand to wrap the yarn with, so it makes it a little easier. So you wrap, you go counterclockwise, you go under the needle, and then around and back up. So you're wrapping it counterclockwise, and then the motion is you're pushing it back through that loop. You bring the loop through, and then you transfer the stitch over, and that is a purl stitch. And here's a little rhyme that people sometimes use for the purl stitch to help you remember. Jack goes in, puts on a scarf, goes back out, then jumps off. So that's just a little rhyme that you can remember, but it's just 4 easy steps. You enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring the loop through, and transfer it over. And then when you get to the last stitch wants to be treated like everybody else. So you enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, bring the loop through, and then transfer it over. And then once all of your stitches are from the left-hand needle, they move to the right-hand needle. Give them a little, just kind of look at them and see how they look. And then the same is when you learn the knit stitch, you transfer everything back to your left hand and then you start over again. So how's that? Any questions about that?
I think we're good so far. I think since you started in the middle of the row, we'll start with a new row this time and show everybody how to start from the beginning. So
Perfect.
yes.
I like to do that there because it contrasts the difference between the two. So starting at the beginning of the row, you enter the stitch. Do not knit with your tail by mistake. Wrap your yarn.
Wait, sorry, Darren. Starting the beginning of a row with a purl stitch.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. It's Monday.
So you you make sure you reposition your yarn. It's very important that before you start knitting, before you enter the stitch with your needle, that your yarn is in the right position. So position your yarn to the front before you start. And then you're going to dive into the stitch like this, make the X, and then pick up your working yarn, wrap the needle, push that loop back through, transfer it over. So you enter the stitch, wrap the yarn, push it back through, transfer it over. And that is the purl stitch. It's pretty simple. When you try it, it might seem kind of complicated because it's new, but with practice, it'll become very simple in your hand. Your hands will know what to do after you practice. Okay, so I'm wrapping it with my right hand, bringing it through. Wrap the stitch, push it through, transfer it over. How are we doing? Any questions? Is everyone able to see?
I think we're doing okay so far. Getting everybody's mind wrapped around inserting from the other direction and then pushing that yarn off the needle.
Yeah, and that's the two major differences. And it's gonna seem like it's weird because you've never done this before. It is a little weird when you do something new, but you'll get the hang of it. Yes, you make sure that your yarn, what did I do? Hold on a second. I feel like my yarn wasn't in the right place. Always make sure your yarn's in the front of your work. Don't let it get pushed to the back. And then remember, it's kind of like diving in the stitch, and then you make the X. You always wrap the same direction, so that's nice. You don't have to learn a new way to wrap. Push it back through, transfer it over. It's actually, most people like the knit stitch better. Most people don't love doing the purl stitch. I don't know if that's because we all learned the knit stitch first or why, but a lot of people don't like doing the purl stitch as much. Okay.
And Christina actually has a good question. She says, is this stitch just to get a different texture than the one we learned last week, the knit stitch? Or basically, why would you use a purl stitch?
Okay, so let me put this down and I'm going to show you a couple of things. So this hat is a combination of knits and purls that we work together to create new fabrics, new textures and new fabrics. So you're probably familiar with this type of fabric on the bottom of this hat. It's just ribbing, and ribbing is usually on the edges of your sweaters, at the edges of hats and gloves, and ribbing keeps your work laying flat. So that way it doesn't curl up. So you've probably all had sweaters or seen sweaters that have the rolled sleeve or the rolled neck, which is really cute, but the reason it rolls is because there's no ribbing on it. So these are knits, and we're going to talk about how to tell the difference between knits and purls. So these are knits and these are purls. And lining them up like this, and I'm going to show you how to do ribbing here next. So lining them up like this creates this new fabric. And then this fabric on the top of the hat is called stockinette stitch. And the way we create this fabric is we do all of our knit stitches across the row like you already know how to do. But then when you turn your work, instead of doing knit stitches, you do purl stitches on the way back. And that creates a whole new look. So that's why you would want to learn the knit and the purl. Okay, does that answer that question?
Very succinct. Thanks, Darren.
Well, I have this hat here. I'm going to show you the difference between the knit and the purl so that as you start working with it, you'll be able to start learning what that difference is. It's very important to tell the difference. So the knit stitch, all of these stitches here are knit stitches. So this great big field of fabric, they're all knit stitches. And I'm going to isolate one knit stitch right here. And the knit stitch, it's shaped like a V. So you can see right here that it is shaped like a V. And that is a knit stitch. And when you're watching other videos or if you're reading books or taking a class, you're going to hear the teachers referring to the V's, looking like the V stitches or looking for the V's. And that's what a knit stitch looks like. And if you look at all of these stitches, they're all, when they're together, it kind of looks like a zigzaggy line. But actually, they're all just little V's that are lined up next to each other. Stockinette stitch is a very smooth fabric. It's very smooth on the knit side. And if we turn this inside out, so this is the purl side. And the purl side is usually much more textural. It's much more bumpy. And you've probably had sweaters where this was on the outside. This is called reverse stockinette. This side is stockinette. And then if you reverse it, it's called reverse stockinette. It's kind of nice when things make perfect sense like that, right? Things don't always make sense. But the purl side, it looks much more textured. The purl side, instead of zigzaggy lines, it looks more like wavy lines. See how that kind of looks like a wavy line going? So that's the purl stitch and the knit stitch. So you can see the difference is very distinct difference. Now let's look at the ribbing and see if we can decide what are the knits and what are the purls here. So the knit stitches on this side, on the ribbing, so we're going to look for the V. And so right there is our V. So we've got two knit stitches right together. We've got 1 and 2. So these 2 stitches here are knit stitches. And then these stitches are purl stitches. And it might seem silly, but the best way to know they're purl stitches is because they're not knit stitches. You really only have 2 choices. They're either knit stitches or purl stitches. But if you look at them, you can see the knit stitches, when they're lined up together, they kind of stack up on top of each other and make columns. The fabric looks like it's going more vertical and kind of forms vertical lines. Whereas purl stitches, they seem like they're going more horizontal. So the purl stitches, you look for this wavy line for the purl stitches and look for more texture. And also look for the V. And if you can't find the V, chances are that it's a purl stitch. Now there's a secret, the secret life of the knit stitch that you really need to learn and understand. What we determined, right, was that these 2 stitches right here are knit stitches. And we know they're knit stitches because we can clearly see that there are V's, right? We know they're knit stitches, 100% sure. So I'm going to stick my needle through here so that we're marking these, so that you know I'm not trying to trick you with a sleight of hand. And when you turn this over and look at the back, just like magic, those stitches changed from knit stitches to purl stitches. So the secret about the knit stitch and the purl stitch is that they are the exact same stitch, except one is the front and one is the back. So they look very different from the front and the back. So these here are knit stitches, and we can tell they're knit stitches because we can clearly see the two V's. And if we turn these over, we can see they've changed into purl stitches. So it's just like a coin. If you have a quarter or a silver dollar or something and you have heads or tails, the coin is different on both sides and it looks different from front and back. You look different from the front and the back. So the knit stitch wants to be like everyone else and it just looks different from each side. Okay, so you want to get really familiar with learning how to tell the difference. So whenever you're making a knit stitch on your work, secretly on the back side of your work, you're making a purl stitch. And when you're making a purl stitch on your work, on the opposite side of that, you're making a knit stitch. So you're actually working on both sides of the fabric at the same time. So that's kind of something you need to start thinking about as you're doing it. Any questions about that, learning the difference between the knit and the purl? Sometimes it can be confusing.
It can be a little confusing sometimes, and I can't remember who told me this, but I always think of the bumps of the purl stitch either like little pearls, you know, like you would find in an oyster, or
Yeah,
someone said
true.
as pearls of barley, which I always think is interesting.
True. Both of those could work. So, yeah. But the purl stitches are a little harder to identify because they're not such a distinct thing like the V. So, I mean, it seems silly to say, but it's just like if they're not knits, then they're pearls because there's only two choices. We have two choices for that. So what I want to do now is to show you how to work the knit and the purl together in the same row to create ribbing. So I'm going to demonstrate that for you. So I'm going to start out with two knits. So do two knit stitches, just like normal. And then you have to stop everything, come to a full stop. Open up your needles, reposition your yarn from the back, bring it to the front because now we're going to be working on purl stitches. And now I'm set up to do two purl stitches, or as many as you want, but I'm going to do two purl stitches. And there's one and two purl stitches. And once your yarn is in the right position for either stitch, you can do as many stitches as you want. Just put your yarn in the right position and then just go for it. So now I'm going to do two knit stitches because I'm going to create ribbing. So you put your yarn in the back. So you have to take it between the needles to go towards the back. Now I'm going to do two knit stitches. Okay, come to a full stop, open your needles and bring it through. So I want to demonstrate a few ways to do it wrong, because that way maybe if I show you how to make the mistakes, you can learn to avoid them and you won't have to make them. So I did my two knit stitches and now I need to do two purl stitches. So I'm going to enter the stitch to do my purl and I realized, oh, my yarn isn't in the right place. So I'm going to bring my yarn. I have to bring my yarn to the front so I can see it. So I'm going to bring my yarn to the front. Now what happens is when I bring my yarn to the front, you see how it wraps around the needle. And anytime yarn wraps around the needle, it has the potential of becoming a stitch. So I'm going to just do this incorrectly to demonstrate what happens. So I do my purl stitch. And what happens is I create this new stitch. And this is called a yarn over. And this happens by accident. But later on, when you're learning other things, sometimes you'll do this on purpose. If you arrange, this creates a hole in your fabric. And if you arrange those holes in the shape of a flower, now you've made lace. But if you just have random holes in it, then it's not so good. So that's what happens if you don't do it correctly. So I'm going to take that out. And how to avoid that. So I just did my 2 knits, my yarn's in the back. I enter my stitch to do my purl. I realize, oh, my yarn's in the wrong place. So what you have to do is you have to exit the stitch and separate your needle. So I said before, make sure your yarn is always in the right place before you start. So before you insert your needle, make sure your yarn is in the right place, and that'll help you avoid that mistake. And so then you have to bring the yarn in between the needles. So it's like if you're scoring a field goal. You have to bring it in between the needles. If you bring it this way, I'm going to bring it to the front. What happens, you can see it's wrapping around my needle, so it's going to give me that yarn over, which is going to mess up my count and create a hole. If I bring it this way, same thing, it's going to mess up my count because it has a potential of becoming a stitch. I think you'd probably realize it here because it would be really weird, but you don't want to do that. I've even had students, for whatever reason, reach under here and try to bring it this direction to the front. And that's going to create this weird strand of yarn coming up your work. So you don't want to do that. There's only one way to do it right, is you have to open your needles and it has to come in between. So once it becomes in between, now you're set up to do as many purl stitches as you want. So you're making sure that your yarn is in the right position. And also going back the other way, full stop. You can't go like that. You can't go like that. It has to go in between. And it's a very common mistake for new knitters to do that. And then you wonder what happened. So if I show you now, maybe we don't have to do that later on. Okay. So I'm going to do one last purl at the end here, just to get rid of that stitch. Now I've taken all the stitches off my left-hand needle. They're on the right-hand side. Now I'm going to transfer it over. And quickly, I'm going to do a couple more so that you can kind of see how it takes shape. One thing about knitted fabric, when you're working on it, frequently it doesn't look like you're doing it right, or it's not taking shape until you get several rows in. So once you get 2 or 3 rows in, it'll start to look more correct, more like the way it's going to look. The stitches need to stack up on each other and sit next to each other to create the design. So hopefully you can see this starting to take shape. So I like to give my work a little snug like that to kind of straighten things up. So when I started this piece, I was demonstrating knits and purls, so I wasn't really starting out doing ribbing. So it's not going to be correct the whole way down, but you can start to see the knit stitches are stacking up on top of each other. There's 2 knit stitches, and then the purl stitches are starting to stack up on top of each other. So here are 2 purl stitches, and then 2 knit stitches at the end. And the end stitch is kind of curl, so it's always kind of hard to tell what it is. But if you kind of force to see it, you can see that V shape. So that 2 knit stitches on the end. Now it's very important that you can tell your knit stitches from your purl stitches when you're actually doing your work, not necessarily like we looked before when you've already completed work. So if you lay this down and come back in a couple of hours or maybe next week and you pick it up and you're like, oh, I don't remember where I left off. So you have to be able to tell the difference. So again, all you do is you look for the V, and it looks a little different when it's right on the edge of the needle. So that's why I want to show you. So that's the V, and then the edge stitch is sometimes really hard to tell because it twists. But if you kind of force it around and line it up, you can kind of tell. And then the purl stitch, and then here's what Claire was saying, and you can really see it here. It looks like a bump or a bead or a purl. And I don't know if that's why it became called a purl, but that's kind of what it looks like. And if you look at the purl stitch, you can see that it's bumped up against the needle. So it's really bumped up tight against the needle and touching the needle. And if you look at the knit stitch, let's look at these two, you can see they're not even really touching the needle. They're kind of hanging below the needle. So the knit stitch hangs below the needle. It's a much longer stitch. And then the purl stitch is just like these little bumps. And it's actually very easy to tell the difference once you get the hang of it. If you line up purls, a whole bunch of them in a row, it creates a ridge. So you're going to hear purls being referred to as purl bumps or purl ridges. So that's one way you hear purls being referred to. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate that again quickly. Open your needles, position your yarn. Okay, my doorbell rang and I had to go do something. I ordered a pizza, now I'm back later. I don't know what happened. What stitch is this? I'm not sure what that is, but these are knit stitches because I can see the V's, so that must be a purl. So that's kind of what you need to make sure you know the difference, because you never know, you might get distracted and have to come back another time. And then once you get in the rhythm of it, like knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, it's easy to kind of just stay in the rhythm of it, but you always want to double check every now and then to make sure you didn't get off track, because it is easy to get off track. And if you're doing your knit 2, purl 2, but they're not lining up on top of each other, then you're not going to create ribbing. You'll create a different type of fabric, but if that's not what you want, then you might not be happy. Okay, so that is knitted 2 by 2 ribbing. And ribbing can be 2 by 2, 1 by 1, 3 by 3. It could be random. It could be like knit 2, purl 3, knit 1, purl 5. But if it's balanced like this, where it's knit 2, purl 2, or it's really pretty close to being balanced, then it really helps make your fabric lay flat and it gives it a nice edge. And it kind of pulls in like this, so it's almost like has an elastic quality. So it'll help your hat stay on your head, and like if you push your sweater sleeves up, they'll kind of stay up. It's a little tighter. Sometimes they'll have you knit the ribbing on a smaller needle to make it even more snug. So that's the properties of ribbing. So if you were to make a scarf out of ribbing, the whole length of the scarf, it would squeeze in like this and it would become much more narrow than what you think. So just remember, ribbing always kind of pulls in like that. Okay. So now for stockinette stitch, it's very easy. It's much easier really than ribbing. Ribbing's not so hard. So for stockinette stitch, you just knit all on one side. You put all your knits on one side and then all of your purls on the other side. So I'm going to do it quickly here. This is the knit stitch. We're all familiar with that. I just want to try to do a couple of rows so you can see how it shapes up. I mean, I can tell you it's going to be stockinette stitch, but it's nice to see how it forms. Okay, all of my knits. And now, see, look, I created knit stitches. You saw me doing knit stitches, but when you turn your work over, there's a whole row of purls. So just remember, when you're creating knits on one side, you're creating purls on the other side. So you're really working on both sides of your fabric at the same time. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a whole row of purls. So I'm looking at purls, I'm going to make purls. If you're looking at knits, you're going to make knits. So I'm going to make a bunch of purls. And when I knit, I wrap my yarn with my left hand. You can wrap it with your left hand. You can wrap it with your right hand. There's lots of different ways of doing it. And as long as you're entering your stitch correctly, and doing all the things to make the stitches right, it doesn't really matter how you get there. I taught myself how to do this one when I first started, and it's just the most comfortable way for me. So all purl stitches on this row. Okay, so we did all purl stitches, we're sure. Now we look at this side, and what do we see? All knit stitches. All knit stitches. And so I'm going to do one more row of knit stitches. So we all know how to do knit stitches, so I'm just going a little fast just to get to the end of the row so I can show you how they're going to look. Okay. So now if I were to continue, you can see how the knit stitches are stacking up on top of each other and making this fabric, this new texture. It's different than the ribbing, so here's my ribbing. It's different than that, it's much smoother. So that's the difference between knitting stockinette stitch and knitting ribbing. And if I were to continue with this, you can see how it looks very similar to this hat. So you can see the ribbing and then the stockinette stitch. So that's how this is created. So stockinette stitch, you keep all of your knits on one side and all of your purls on the other side. And if you turn your work over and you lose track of where you are, and you're not going to be careful, so always look, these are purls, so I'm going to do my purls. Sometimes people aren't careful and they'll think they were on the knit side. Maybe they came back the next day. And what's going to happen is you'll get reverse stockinette. So your fabric will change. Now you could actually do this on purpose and create kind of like a tone-on-tone stripe of a different texture. And that could be very nice, but if it's not what you're expecting, you might be disappointed. So before you start each row, double check and make sure you're looking at the right stitch and doing the right stitch. So I wasn't paying attention and I did a row of knits on the purl side, and what that created was a row of purls on the knit side. But maybe I come back the next morning and I pick this up and look at it and I'm like, okay, they're knits, so I'm on the knit side. I'm going to do knits, right? Because they're knits, and maybe you're not looking at the needle. So I'm going to do a row of knit stitches just to show you how you can create texture with a purl stitch if you throw a row of purls in. How it looks. Because it can, if you do it on purpose, it can make a very nice texture. But this is why you want to learn how to do purls, because you can create all different kinds of textures. I'm only showing you a few today, but there's seed stitch, there's moss stitch. You can create purls in a large field of stockinette stitch and arrange them in the shape of like a duck, or maybe letters, or you could write your name. There's lots of different things. It's really unlimited what you can do once you learn them. So you can see this nice ridge of purls, and that could give you a nice texture, or it could like ruin your whole day if you really didn't want it. But I've had people come into my classes and they've done this by mistake and they're like, I have no idea how this happened. So I like to show how the mistakes happen so that if they happen to you, you'll remember, and maybe you can avoid them. You don't have to do it. If I do them for you, maybe you don't have to. All right, any questions about any of this?
Oh, let's see. We've had a flurry of questions. I'm trying my best to keep up in the chat here.
Okay.
Let's scroll back a little bit.
This is a lot going on.
Let's see. We did have a question about the purl stitch on the edge of the row being looser than the rest of them. And I thought it was probably either your edge stitch is always a little bit looser because it's only got one friend to hang on to. It doesn't have two buddies. But also, at least for me, I find that when I start the rows, I start with a knit stitch versus the rows I start on the purl side, one edge is always a little bit tighter. I think it's just a difference of tension.
I've heard also that the purl stitch is naturally more loose than the knit stitch. So
I think so. I mean, you are going into the stitch and doing it a little bit differently, so I would expect some difference.
So because it's on the edge and because it's a purl, it's going to look a little bit looser, like this one looks loose right here. But by the time you get the stitch above it, so now it has a friend below it on the side, and then it'll have one on the above it. It kind of holds the tension and it makes everything much more even. You see, even if you kind of pull it like that, gently, you don't want to stretch your fabric or distort it, it kind of evens out a little bit for you.
Jay Grant, oh, sorry, Darren.
No, go ahead.
Jay Grantham had a good question about why, at least in this pattern and probably most patterns, ribbing seems to be an even number of knit and purl stitches. And could you do like 6 of one and 3 of another or whatever?
And the thing about the knit and the purl stitch is the knit stitch wants to curl this direction. And if you don't have your ribbing set up right, so you can see this is stockinette stitch on this hat that's unfinished. So knitting on one side, purls on the other. And you can see what happens is it rolls. It just naturally wants to roll that direction. And if I didn't have ribbing here, it would naturally roll this direction as well. So it always wants to roll up stockinette stitch. So if your knits and your purls are very balanced, your knit wants to turn that way and your purl wants to turn this way. And so they're both trying to curl, and they end up holding each other flat because they're pulling at this with the same amount of resistance. But if you have, let's say, 6 purls and 1 knit, then where you have those 6 purls together, those 6 purls are going to be able to roll. And then that 1 knit stitch will kind of keep them from rolling right there. So you're not going to get such a flat edge. If you did something like 2 knit and 1 purl, it would probably still lay pretty flat. So you kind of have to, if you want to experiment with it and try out different amounts of stitches, then it's something that could be really fun to do, and you can see the difference in practice. I mean, you could have 2 knits, 2 purls, and a little cable stitch, and then 2 knits, 2 purl. I mean, it could be anything in a ribbing. So there's no rules. It's just going to react a certain way, and then the question is, do you like how it looks? Is that what you want? And then you go from there.
Yep, exactly. I think I've made socks before with a pattern of like 6 knits and then 2 purls, and it's not as stretchy as if those stitches were even, but it's a nice little decorative fabric.
Yeah, so if it's right or if it's wrong, the only person making it can really answer that question, and maybe the answer is, do you like it or not? So sometimes that's the right answer. Okay, any other questions?
Let's see here. We had some questions on fixing mistakes, picking up stitches, but I just wanted to point out for people not in the chat that we did do a class on fixing mistakes a few weeks ago, so you can go back and watch that video. We've got a few more other things to blast through in this class, so I don't want to get us sidetracked.
Okay, so we ready to move on?
I think so.
Okay. If we have any time at the end, maybe we can touch on a few other things. So we learned how to do ribbing. We learned how to tell the difference between them.
Darren, where'd your sound go?
Oh, sorry. We learned how to do ribbing and stockinette stitch. We learned how to make the purl and how to tell the difference between the purl. So I think what's next is, do we want to review the pattern to make the hat? I think we've learned all the skills we're going to need to do that.
One quick question, and probably why you've got the hat there. We did have a couple of people wondering how you would count rows in stockinette or in ribbing, because you can do it the same.
Yeah, perfect. Glasses back on. Okay, so if you find the V, so we talked about finding the V, and it's easy to kind of determine there's our V. So basically you just count them, count the V's. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You just count them as you go. And if you need to count your purls, like I would never count purls, I would turn it over and count knits, because it's really hard to count the purls because you're going to get off track. So just turn it over and count the knits. So here's my cast on. So my cast on, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 7. Just goes up like that. You just count them. Is that pretty clear? Is it okay?
That's good. Sometimes I do count my pearls, like if I don't know why, sometimes I do, but if you are wanting to count pearls, pick either the smiley face or the frowny face and count up that column.
So if you look at this, this is the smile because it's going up like this, and then this is the frown. So you would 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But I find knit stitches much easier to count, and you don't want to get off track.
Oh yes, knit stitches are much easier to count, but
live your life. If you want to live dangerous. Claire likes to live dangerous. I like everything to be super easy. So, okay. We ready to start the pattern or no?
Yeah, let's go through this pattern.
Okay. So the pattern is, it's by Lion Brand, and it's the Lion Brand Heartland Thick and Quick Knitting 2 hat. And this hat was designed for this class. Couple of changes though we had to make. Heartland Thick and Quick is discontinued, sadly enough. So, but the pattern's still nice. So we've made some changes. Instead of using Heartland Thick and Quick, we're using Hometown Bonus Bundle. And it's the same thickness, so it's not really going to make much difference. The Hometown might be just a little thicker. And so instead of Heartland Thick and Quick, we're changing it. And of course, you can pick whatever color you want. Knitting needles, size 11. So I think I used a size 13 because this yarn is just a little bigger. So I think I did use a 13. You can try an 11 or a 13 and see which one gives you the best fabric for your stitching. Probably won't make a huge difference. You need knitting needle size 11 or 13, and then large eye blunt needles, and that's just for weaving in your ends. And that is this little guy here. The eye's large enough to put yarn through, and it's not sharp because we're going in between the strands of yarn. Gauge, all gauge means is your stitches are the same size as the designer stitches, and that means your hat will be the same size. That becomes very important later on, but for beginning projects, it's not as crucial. Okay, so now for the hat, you cast on 50 stitches. So that sounds pretty easy. We know how to cast on. Row 1, knit 2, purl 2, repeat from the asterisk to the last 2 stitches and ending with a knit 2. So whenever there's an asterisk or any kind of special punctuation, sometimes there's parentheses or brackets, you need to pay special attention. Something's going to happen. Usually that means something's going to be repeated. So there's an asterisk, and then it says K2, which is knit 2, P2, which is purl 2, and then we repeat from the asterisk, and we're going to end with knit 2. And on this side, we're going to start with purl 2. Well, there's an asterisk again, purl 2, knit 2, and we're going to repeat all the way across. The last 2 stitches are going to be a purl 2. Repeat rows 1 and 2 until the piece measures about 2.5 inches from the cast on edge. So that's easy. If you like ribbing, if you want a really long ribbed hat that you can roll it up, you can make your ribbing like 4 or 5 inches. It's your hat. So the next row you're going to knit, and then the next row you're going to purl. And if you knit 1 whole row and purl 1 whole row, that sounds like stockinette stitch. So we know how to do that. And look right here, it says work in stockinette stitch, knit 1 row and purl 1 row until the hat measures about 9 inches from the cast on edge. And if you wanted a real slouchy hat, maybe go 10 or 11 inches. You can always make little changes to make the hat suitable for what you want. And then it says we're going to cut the yarn, leaving a 20-inch long tail, thread the tail through all of the stitches on the knitting needle and pull together tightly. That sounds crazy. I don't know what that means, right? We're going to have to figure that out. But one thing we do want to notice is it does not say bind off. So we're not going to bind it off. We're going to figure out what they're telling us here. Maybe that's new. We've never done that before. So let's look at this hat here. It's almost finished. So I've worked this hat up to that point. And I left a really long tail. And so I recommend leaving a tail that's maybe a little longer. It's better to go a little longer than to cut it too short, because if you cut it too short, you're going to be very sad. So err on the side of maybe leaving it a little longer. So we're going to thread that onto our large eye blunt needle. Being careful to get the whole thing through. Okay, there we go. The whole thing through. And what did it say? It said, put it on a large eye blunt needle. And then these are the stitches on our knitting needle. So we're just going to go straight through all of them. And I'm just going to kind of take them off without splitting my yarn. Take them off just like this. You can do one at a time. You can do two at a time. You just don't want to miss any. And just put them down onto your tail. So all the way across. And it just takes a few minutes. So, oops. See, if you do that where they kind of slip off the needle, just before anything happens, just put them back on the needle. You don't want them to unravel. There's a lot of people think that if you drop a knit stitch or something like that, it's going to just immediately start unraveling, but it's really not the case. It's not quite that fragile of a fabric. So but you do want to pick it up before it starts, because it will unravel and go all the way down if you let it. Okay, almost to the end. I think I did split my yarn on a couple of these because I was trying to hurry. That's okay for demonstration purposes. Okay, so now I'm going to pull my tail through. And it said pull together tightly. So you pull, I left a very long tail. Okay, so you can see it's kind of closing up, kind of like how, like a change purse or something, if you pulled it very tight, it closes up. Now it doesn't say to do this, but I kind of like, volume's weird. So I kind of like to go through one more time and kind of close up this edge to kind of really secure it. So kind of, this is a little pro tip. That way, if you pull it tight, it's going to stay closed. And if you've got a hole here and you don't like it, then you can kind of just pick up a few stitches like this and just go around and pull it a little more tight. And then that'll close that up. Okay. So now, that doesn't look right. That's not really a hat. What are we going to do about that? So let's look and see what it says. Finishing. Use the long tail to sew the side edges together for the back seam, and then weave in your ends. So we don't know what a seam is. We don't know how to seam, right? But we're going to learn how to do it. And what I'm going to show you is called the mattress stitch, and it gives you an invisible seam. So what we're going to do is we're going to find our knit stitches. So this is a knit stitch here. And we want to find the one on the very, very edge. So we're just going to be looking for basically 2 strands of yarn on the very edge. Sometimes they don't look so much like a V because they want to curl on the edge, but we really just want to find these 2 strands of yarn. And if we pull our yarn, we pull our fabric apart, what we see is these bars that go in between our stitches. All right, so you really wouldn't want to pull it this hard because you would end up distorting your fabric, but I'm showing you this so you can clearly see. So these are either ladders or bars is what they'll be referred to. So we've got our knit stitch here, and we've got our bars that go in between. So you're going to take your needle and you're going to go under that bar. And then you're going to pull it, go through like that. And now you're going to go to the other side. You're going to find your edge stitch. So just find those two on the edge. I'm going to stretch this side open too. Again, you wouldn't want to do this on yours, but so you can clearly see what I'm doing it. And then you find the bar on this side. So you go under it, and then you pull it through. And it's just like lacing up shoes or climbing up a ladder. We went under that one, so we're going to just take the next one. And I don't like to skip any. Some people will say you can skip them, but it'll give you a much nicer, much stronger seam if you don't skip any. So go over here. And then I'll wonder this one. And once you start this, it's kind of easy to see because you're going to go in a straight line. So it's easy to kind of continue on the same path once you kind of start a path. So you can see here is my other one. So just go to the next one up. And then the next one here. And the next one here. So you can kind of dig for it and kind of pull it up like that. So usually I wouldn't pull it out and distort it. This is normally how I would do it. I would just kind of unroll that edge and just kind of put my finger there. You don't want to stretch it, and just go under it like that. And that way you're not going to distort your fabric. So just go right in there. And so you can't even see the bar right there, but you know it's there. So you enter it here, and then you come out in the next stitch, and then you've picked up that bar. And once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite easy. And again, what we're looking for is this bar right here. There. And then on this side, how are you feeling about this?
I think everyone's fascinated by watching you seam. The chat has gone very quiet.
Okay, I'm going to show you a magic trick here in a second. Get a couple more stitches going. And there's different ways to seam. You could do a whip stitch, you could do a running stitch, but whenever you have stockinette stitch that needs to be sewn together, this is the best way to do it. And this really works best with stockinette stitch. Claire, do you ever do this with do you do it like on garter stitch or seed stitch?
I was going to say, you're psychic, Darren, but Linda was just asking about it for garter stitch specifically. And really the method is the same, except instead of, like you said, looking for that V of a knit stitch at the edge, you'll have to sort of look for, it'll be like a little, it'll sort of be a purl stitch at the very edge. It's not as well defined as a purl stitch in stockinette fabric, but it's the same technique. You're going into the bar between two stitches. And it's a little bit harder to see in a textured stitch, but it works the same.
But once you start on a textured stitch, once you establish the path you're going to go on, you would just continue. You don't even need to look at the stitches, really. You would look at the bar in between. So you could really do this with anything, but I usually don't. I'm not sure why. I just usually, this is my stockinette stitch seam. So, okay, so that doesn't look very good, right? Like, what is that? Why does that look so awful? So if you just take this and you pull it really tight, just like magic, that's the magic trick. You cannot even tell. And then if you turn it inside out, there's your seam. But that's why I like this one so much, is because it really does make a nice invisible seam. And then you would go down, and this is ribbing, but because it's ribbing and we're doing our knits on the edge, you would just follow that path down and just go on the same path all the way down. And then on this side as well. And if you notice, there's 2 knits on each side. And what happens is because we're doing matcher stitch, we end up sacrificing this stitch on the edge, and that becomes our inside seam. So we're going to lose 1 knit on that side and 1 knit on this side. And what happens is then it lines up like this, and our ribbing continues uninterrupted. So the designer thought about that in advance for you. So like on this hat, it ends up, see, you have your knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and that's where the seam is. Okay, any questions about that?
We're all impressed by your seaming magic.
It's so easy. The first time it looks very impressive, but the first time you do it, you'll be like, that's not hard. Anything else?
We have a few questions. Let's see. For instance, in the ribbing in the pattern, it says, you know, work 2 inches or whatever from the cast on edge. And just demonstrate your cast on edge would be where?
The cast on edge is just the very beginning. So the pattern might say from the cast on edge or from the beginning of your work. So the cast on edge would just be the very edge of your work. So like you wouldn't measure from here, which might be where your first knit stitch or purl stitch would be. See, there's the cast on edge, and there's your first knit stitch. So you want to make sure you're going clear to the very, very edge. And then again, you can make the ribbing as long as you want. Just don't run out of yarn.
True, yes. Make sure you've got some extra yarn there. Wrote myself some notes here. Do you have time to quickly show how to purl in continental?
Probably. Now, I'm not great at it. But with continental,
move your hands down a little bit. Thank you.
You want to make sure the yarns. You want to make sure the yarn's in the front. So these are the rules you always have to do. You always have to have your yarn in the front, and then you always have to enter the stitch the right way. And then again, however you wrap the yarn, as long as you're going counterclockwise, then that's going to be okay. So you enter the stitch, and with continental, you kind of pick up the yarn with the needle, and then you pull it down, go through like that. It's a little hard to learn when you're first learning it, but
oh, your hands are off camera toward the top. There you go.
Once you get good at it, it is faster. So it's kind of worth it. But I never do this, so I'm not good at it. I know how to do it.
That's a good point, though. If you never do it, then you're not good at it. So practice is key.
Yeah, so you can see how clumsy I am at it because I don't do it. I find this way much easier, so that's how I do it.
Yeah. And someone did have a question about when stitches fall off. Again, I'm just going to say we did our Fixing Mistakes class a few weeks ago, so I would go watch that because we went over it really clearly with more time than we're going to have here. Oh, and I'm sorry I didn't write down your name. Someone had a question asking how you store your circular needles.
Well, I just came up with this new idea. I bought a 4-inch binder, one of those really thick binders, and I bought a whole bunch of the zipper pouches like you used to put your pens and pencils in when you were in grade school. And I bought a whole bunch of them, and I put each size circular needle in a full binder like that so I can keep them all sorted because they were a nasty mess for 15 years.
That is a good idea.
It was a little pricey, but I decided, you know what, I need to get these sorted out.
Yeah, it's much better than having them just jumbled in a shoebox somewhere.
It's kind of how I had before. So
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can come up with a good way to sort double-pointed needles that's not so expensive, you can make a fortune because everybody's looking for that answer.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Oh, and it's going to be a long way back to scroll, but I know someone had a question about if a pattern is giving you gauge in ribbing, and say, would you measure that stretched out or not so stretched out?
Relaxed. So if it was measuring it, whenever you're measuring fabric, like knitted fabric, the problem is it can be very stretchy. So if you've just been working on it and fussing with it, that's not the real measurement. So you want to kind of just let it rest for a few minutes and let it kind of just be how it is, and kind of let it, you know, move to the point where it's going to be, and then you would just measure it like this. You want to make sure it's not stretched or crumpled. Like you wouldn't want to do that and then measure it, because that's not accurate. You wouldn't want to do that because that's not accurate. So just kind of give it a minute to kind of relax, and then measure it from there.
All right. And again, I just wanted to remind everybody this class was recorded, so you'll be able to see it starting tomorrow afternoon at michaels.com/classes. And that's where you can view the Knitting 101 if you need that, as well as we did the Fixing Mistakes and a few other more advanced classes. And then if you want to join us next Monday, that is August 24th, same time, so 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll be teaching Knitting 103.
Okay, maybe put the camera back on my face so I can show the mittens. So this is what we learned how to make today, is this hat. And so next week, we're going to learn how to make these mittens. Now this might look super intimidating. It might look like a huge jump, but it's really not. You start out with ribbing, and we know how to do ribbing. And then you do stockinette stitch, and we know how to do that. And the main thing you're learning in your class is how to make things smaller and how to make things bigger. So we add stitches here to create this gusset for the thumb, and then we take stitches away to create this nice even point to make the top of the hat, the top of the hand. And if you look at the hat and the mittens kind of together like this, they almost look the same, right? So it's not such a big jump. So don't think it's going to be too hard.
Alrighty, thanks for joining us, everyone. I just popped the handout in the chat one last time if you want to grab that. And hopefully we see you all next week.
Have a good week.